Good morning. I'm Marcus Jackman, pastor of Copper Hills Church in Harriman, Utah. This is Gleanings, feasting on the Word of God in the margins of everyday life. Have you ever envied someone else's work? The piece of the project that they get to do, or their different, cushy and comfortable and successful looking operation? I know I have. I was lost in some envy of somebody else's labor just yesterday. On Mountain View Corridor, just west of our home, there was this guy, looked like he was operating a Caterpillar D5 bulldozer, helping to just spread out dirt and smooth and grade the ground, preparing for a roadway extension. It looks so comfortable. It looks so nice. It looks so easy. And the results, he could see the results, and they were really, really nice. I'm not an expert on this at all, but I thought, well, it looks like he's accomplishing his task. Because when I operated heavy machinery for a short season, I didn't have the results like that. Now, that wasn't the goal. I was involved in shearing. This was not the machine operated, but it's one very similar to it. It had a shearing blade up front, which means I was driving through overgrown areas and shearing down trees and stumps, and oftentimes pulling a heavy plow. So I was throwing planting beds behind me while I was shearing, and the results were good and they were effective, but they didn't look that nice. And the operation was much more taxing and much more unpredictable. You might slide into a hidden stream bed that you couldn't see. It was not easy, smooth going. It was very, very rough when you hit a stump at what passes for full speed at shearing. It's very, very rough. It's very, very difficult. And it was uncomfortable. And so when I saw this other guy smoothing and grading and just tootling around and finding this perfectly flat surface, I found myself envying the work that he got to do and envying the results that he got to see, because I had never seen anything like that in my wake. I wasn't supposed to. That's not what the job was. But I never got to see the results like that. And that made me think of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. When I thought about envying somebody else's work, Paul writes, he says, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Who am I?" Basically, he's saying, and who is this other person that you're trying to pit us against each other? We are both servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He says, this isn't to Apollos' credit. It's not to my credit. It's to the Lord's credit. It's God's work to bring the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. He says, we are the same. We are in the same boat. We have differing assignments, and we'll be laboring differently, and some of the wages may be different, but there's no light to shine between us. We are both servants of the Lord as the Lord assigns. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. That's what Paul writes. What room is there for envy for you and me as we look at anybody else and say, oh, it looks like it's so easy for them. It looks like it's so great for them. And why are things so hard for me? Sometimes it's just because that's the work that God has assigned to you. And that doesn't sound like good news. That doesn't sound like something comfortable, because then now I can do nothing about it. I'm wrong to envy, and I'm wrong to self-pity. That's not what I'm saying. What would it look like for you to imagine instead of the stories that we tell ourselves in envy, they don't deserve it, or I don't deserve it, whatever other stories we tell ourselves in envying somebody else's work? What if you saw yourself as God's fellow worker? What if you saw yourself as a faithful laborer wherever he planted you? Whose work or role are you envying, and whose labor do you wish that you got to have? Why? Isn't it enough for me today to be God's fellow worker? What if I viewed myself like that? What if I viewed others like that? Say the Lord has put them there, has planted them there for a specific work. And it's not, I don't need to understand, and I don't need to justify why I have this and they have that. I don't need to understand that. I am trusting the Lord, who calls me his fellow worker, who says, "You are my worker." What an honor, what a privilege, and what peace is available to you and to me, laying down our envy and just taking up the labor that God has given to us. Bless you today.